I turned 32 last spring, but sometimes it still feels like I never quite left my childhood home. Not the walls or the furniture, but the weight of always being measured against my sister. From the moment I can remember, Clara, my older sister by 3 years, was the one bathed in golden light. Teachers adored her, neighbours praised her, and my parents beamed with pride at every report card and milestone she collected. Me? I was the other daughter. Clara got the bigger bedroom, the extra slice of pie, the second and third chances. I got told I was strong, independent, the one who didn't need help. It sounds flattering on the surface, but in our family it was just another way of saying, you'll have to manage without us. Clara's life unfolded like the kind of glossy family portrait my mother used to frame on the mantel. She married young, to a man my parents called a real provider. By 27, she had 2 boys, a neat little house, and a Christmas card list mailed out before the leaves even fell from the trees. My parents, Ellen and Robert, never said it outright, but their pride was obvious. Every story at family gatherings circled back to Clara, her promotions, her baking, her son's school projects, and me. I rented a small apartment across town, no husband, no children, just a career I'd built brick by brick, a retirement account I guarded carefully, and a quiet space that was mine. I never thought of it as failure until I saw the way my parents' smiles dimmed when the subject of me came up. "Don't you want children before it's too late?" my mother would ask over Sunday dinner, as though my worth had an expiration date stamped across my forehead. "Your sister's boys are growing so fast. It's a shame they don't have cousins." I'd nod, sip my wine, and change the subject. The truth was, I thought maybe, just maybe, if I worked hard enough, if I kept showing up for holidays, fixing their Wi-Fi, remembering the birthdays they forgot, they might see me the way they saw Clara. But the truth crept in slowly, like dust gathering on shelves you stop noticing. I wasn't the daughter they bragged about. I was the one they assumed would always be fine, no matter what. And so I became invisible in my own family, safe, reliable, but never celebrated. Still, I never complained. I told myself distance was easier. That being the quiet, responsible one was its own kind of armor. What I didn't know was that distance would not protect me, not from what was coming. Because when Clara's carefully polished life began to shatter piece by piece, my parents wouldn't look to her for the glue, they would look to me. And I would learn in the harshest way possible that being the strong one doesn't make you untouchable. It just makes you the one everyone feels entitled to lean on. And that was only the beginning. Perfection doesn't explode. It fractures in whispers. It starts as a hairline line you can't see unless the light hits just right. And then one day your fingers trace the rim of the family teacup and feel the split running under the glaze. That's how Clara's life came apart. Quiet, then all at once. She had been posting pictures of school pickups and Sunday roasts, the boys with jam on their cheeks, her husband Marcus throwing leaves in the yard. You could scroll and believe in it. Everyone did. But somewhere beneath the filters and captions, the truth was knocking. Clara found it on a Tuesday when she needed a charger. Marcus's phone lit up in her hands. There were messages that didn't belong to a marriage, plans made at lunch hours, nicknames that soured in her throat, photos that made the room tilt. Later, she told me she'd always sensed it. She was just too tired from holding the image together to admit the image was already gone. By Friday, she had called a lawyer. The woman moved like thunder, steely voice, clear timelines, no patience for Marcus's sudden promises to talk it out. Clara filed for divorce before the weekend ended. If this were a story about justice, maybe that would have shaken the earth enough to bring him back to reality. Instead, Marcus evaporated. No apology, no plan for the boys, no child support. Just a forwarding address that sent mail into a void. Our parents were stunned, then sad, then devout about standing by Clara. They said it with the kind of righteousness that loves to be overheard. But their savings lived inside retirement accounts and in sentimental places. Old coins, a piano, no one had played in 15 years. When the rent and legal fees started arriving like weather, the math did not bend for speeches. Clara moved into a worn 2-bedroom on the edge of town. The boys shared a room with star stickers left by someone else's childhood. The wallpaper curled away from the corners like a secret. I didn't flinch. I wrote a check for the attorney's retainer, $5,500, paid in person because I wanted the paper to be real, and I covered 6 months of rent, $7,200 spread across bank transfers, each line a small piece of calm. On Saturdays, I took Evan and Jules to the library or the park so Clara could breathe without being somebody's everything for a few hours. I didn't keep a tally, I didn't make speeches, I loved my nephews. I could help, so I did. And still, at dinner with Ellen and Robert, the first 20 minutes were a eulogy for Clara's marriage, and the last 5 minutes were a cross-examination of my life. "Are you seeing anyone?" my mother would ask, her fork paused in midair like a metronome. "You're not getting younger, Maya. You don't want to wake up one day and miss it." Miss what? The permission to be applauded at Thanksgiving? The grace you only earn when someone else is standing next to you in a photo? I swallowed those thoughts because I knew that if I said them out loud, the table would flip. I told myself, family meant showing up even when your hands were shaking, so I showed up. I moved Clara's boxes. I read bedtime stories with cracked spines. I learned the price of cereal by brand and whether Jules's sneakers ran small. And at night, in my apartment with the soft light and quiet, I budgeted. Not because anyone asked me to, but because responsible people are always planning for the fires they're expected to put out. Responsibility is funny that way. You wear it long enough and people forget it's clothing. They start treating it like your skin. The calls kept coming from my mother, soft at first, updates about custody paperwork, the new schedule at Clara's part-time job at the community centre. "Your sister is trying so hard," she'd say, tone soaked in a sorrow she had never once used for me. "She's doing everything she can." The unspoken half-sentence floated there. "And you, Maya?" One night, I drove Clara home after an exhausting day at court. The boys were asleep in the back, their heads bumping together with the tender indifference of children who trust that someone is steering. At a red light, Clara stared out the window and whispered, "I hate asking for help." It wasn't a confession so much as a bruise. I said, "I know." I wanted to add, "I hate being the only one people are comfortable asking," but I kept that one for later. Maybe for never. If you've ever been the strong one, Yukahazu, you recognize the gravitational pull. People orbit you with their emergencies and call it loyalty. Then when you draw a circle and say, "Not this time," they accuse you of moving the planets. I told myself I could keep the peace, give a little more, bite my tongue, and somehow the scales would even out. After all, I wasn't drowning. I had my job, my savings, my small, ordered life. I could be the net while Clara repaired the high wire, but the truth about nets is they catch more than what falls. They also catch what people decide not to carry anymore. 3 months into the divorce, the heat in the apartment sputtered. I paid the repairman. The boys brought home school forms that needed fees. I wrote the checks. At Christmas, I bought what my parents couldn't. Coats that would last all winter, the good markers that didn't dry out in a week, a Lego set big enough for both boys to lose themselves in building something that didn't collapse. Our mother cried when the boys unwrapped the gifts. "You're so good to them," she said. She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at Clara like I was a weather pattern she could applaud without gratitude. Then came the slow drift of comments I'd heard all my life, now sharpened. "When will you settle down, Maya?" my father asked as he stacked plates in the sink. "Don't you want a family?" I glanced toward the living room where Evan was teaching Jules to tie his shoes. "I already have one," I said. No one laughed. If this moment resonates, if you've carried a household on your back while listening to speeches about being more generous, tap the like button and tell me where you're watching from. Your stories matter here. They might be the handhold someone else is searching for. The thing about storms is the air changes before the rain starts. You can smell the metallic warning. It arrived as a brightness in my mother's voice I hadn't heard in months. A Wednesday evening, my phone lit up with Mom. I answered with my usual gentle breath. "Maya, honey," she said, too cheerful, too smooth. "We have such good news. Can you come by tonight? Your father's already home and Clara will be here too." Good news? The phrase landed like a coin spinning on a table, glossy but unstable. "What happened?" I asked. "Is it about the boys? Did Marcus—" No, she interrupted. "Even better." The last time she'd said even better, Clara had made a bundt cake that collapsed when we took it out of the pan. We ate it anyway. We always ate the things that fell apart if Clara had made them. I don't know why I thought of that then, except sometimes your body remembers the shape of a ritual before your mind does. "I can be there by 7, I said. "Perfect," she replied, and there was that rehearsed lilt again, like she'd practiced the line in the mirror. "Drive safe." After we hung up, I stood in my quiet kitchen staring at the sink. My cat, marble grey, not yet named because I'd been telling myself not to get too attached to anything, wound around my ankles and blinked up at me as if to say, "You already know how this will feel." I poured kibble into his bowl, turned off the lights, and grabbed my coat. On the drive across town, the sky was the colour of bruised lavender, the streetlights coming alive one by one. I kept rehearsing answers to possibilities that felt reasonable. Maybe the courts had finally located Marcus. Maybe a community fund had come through to help with childcare. Maybe my parents had decided to sell the piano. Every time I thought, it might actually be good news, an old instinct tugged at me. In our house, good news was often code for something that would cost me. I parked in front of the home I grew up in, the hedges trimmed into obedient shapes, the porch light casting a warm circle on the step. From outside, the whole scene behaved like a memory, and yet in my hands, the keys felt heavier than usual, like they knew something I didn't. If you've ever walked into a room certain only that you're the solution to a problem you didn't create, you know the tightening between the ribs, the way breath goes shallow. You know the dread and the duty holding hands. I rang the bell. Footsteps. The lock clicked open. My father stood there smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. My mother called from the living room. "There she is!" Clara's silhouette moved against the lamp's glow. There was a space on the coffee table as if something important had been placed there, then removed at the last second to keep the surprise intact. I stepped inside and wiped my feet on the mat out of an old habit that felt suddenly holy, respecting a threshold even when you suspect you shouldn't cross it. "Tell me the good news," I said, and my voice didn't shake. That came later. The living room felt staged, as though everyone had rehearsed before I arrived. Dad was in his recliner, posture straight, hands folded like a man about to deliver a sermon. Mum perched at the edge of the couch, her smile tight and triumphant. And Clara, my sister, sat beside her, twisting her fingers in her lap, eyes flickering between me and the manila folder on the coffee table. "There she is," Dad said warmly, standing to hug me before gesturing to the folder. "Take a look." I sat down, picked it up, and slid out the papers. Bold letters at the top, mortgage agreement. My heart thudded once, loud enough to feel in my throat. "What is this?" I asked. Mom's smile widened, the kind of practiced brightness she used when company came over. "It's for Clara's new house," she said. "We used most of our savings and part of our retirement for the down payment. Isn't it wonderful? 3 bedrooms, a big yard for the boys, space for them to grow. They need stability, Maya. This apartment just isn't enough." I looked at Clara. She gave a small nod, nervous but complicit. "That's great," I managed. "The boys will love it." I tried to hand the folder back, but Mum pushed it toward me again. No, sweetheart. Those are for you." "For me?" Dad cleared his throat. "We've talked about this as a family, and we've decided you'll take over the mortgage payments. You've been saving for years. You can afford it. Clara can't." For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline. But no one laughed. Clara looked down at her hands. "You're asking me to pay for her house?" I said, my voice low. "She has nothing since Marcus left," Clara whispered, finally meeting my eyes. "I can't give the boys what they need without help." "I've already helped," I reminded them quietly. "I paid for her divorce. I covered 6 months of rent. I've been saving for my own home for 10 years. Mom reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. "We raised you, Maya. We've done so much for you. Isn't it time to give back?" The words landed like ice water. I stood, folder clutched in my hands. "You bought a house knowing she couldn't afford it because you assumed I'd cover it." Dad didn't deny it. "You don't have a husband or children," he said, as though that made me expendable. I set the folder back on the table, every muscle in my body trembling. "This isn't help. This is manipulation." And before the heat behind my eyes turned into tears, I walked out. I thought they'd call the next day, maybe apologize, that they'd realize what they'd asked of me was absurd, that families don't ambush one another with contracts and guilt. But the silence stretched on. Then the whispers began. The first call was from my cousin April, someone I hadn't spoken to since Grandpa's funeral. She didn't say hello, just, "I can't believe you're being so cold." "Excuse me? Clara's a single mom. Those boys are your nephews. You're sitting on all that money and won't help." I gripped the counter until my knuckles whitened. "April, you don't know the full story." "I know enough," she snapped. "Family helps family. Clara would do the same for you." I almost laughed, a bitter, sharp sound that escaped before I could stop it. "No, she wouldn't." "You're unbelievable," she hissed and hung up. The texts came next, then voicemails, extended relatives I barely knew piling on. Uncle Don, Jessica, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. The messages blurred together. Selfish, heartless. They raised you. She has children. You don't. What stunned me most wasn't the anger. It was the certainty, as if my single life made me automatically obligated to fund someone else's. The worst came from Aunt Margaret, my mother's older sister. She called during dinner, her tones syrupy sweet. "I just want to talk some sense into you, honey. You're not getting younger. Who knows if you'll ever have children? At least this way you'd be contributing to your family's future. So, because I'm single, I owe Clara a house? Don't be dramatic. They need help, and you're in a position to give it." That night, I blocked every number that had chimed in against me. One by one, like sealing doors in a sinking ship. If they couldn't respect my boundaries, they didn't deserve access to me. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't about the house. It never was. 2 months passed. Silence. The kind that presses into your chest, filled the space where my family had been. I poured myself into work, into quiet walks in the morning, into anything that didn't carry the Salinger name. Then, on a Thursday, an envelope arrived. Thick, official. I tore it open and my stomach dropped. They were suing me. Ellen and Robert Salinger, my parents, were demanding $450,000 in reimbursement for the expenses of raising me. Food, clothing, education, even a line for emotional support during adolescence. At the end, in plain language, funds to be used to complete the mortgage on the Salinger property purchased for Clara and her minor children. They hadn't even bothered to dress it up as principal. It was a bill, and they had handed it to me. The packet sat heavy on my kitchen table, a mountain of cold ink and legal jargon that boiled down to one thing: my own parents dragging me into court. I had to read it 3 times before my brain would accept the words. $450,000. They had itemized my childhood: food, clothing, vacations, even something called emotional guidance. They'd assigned a price to every scraped knee, every lecture, every family trip when I was 6 years old. They wanted repayment for raising me, with the money earmarked not for themselves, but for Clara's mortgage. I couldn't decide if it was absurd or cruel. Maybe both. The next morning, I sat across from a lawyer recommended by a colleague. Her name was Jennifer Doyle. Sharp-eyed, calm, the kind of person who looked at chaos and measured it like fabric on a cutting table. She flipped through the packet with surgical precision and finally said, "They don't have a legal case. Parents are obligated to provide for their children until adulthood. There is no legal expectation of reimbursement." "Then why sue me?" I asked, my voice small. Jennifer shrugged, unimpressed. "Pressure. They think you'll fold to avoid embarrassment or because guilt has been your leash. Don't let it." I wanted to believe her confidence, but guilt isn't a leash. It's a chain you've worn so long you forget it's there until someone yanks it. For the next 3 weeks, I gathered proof. Copies of checks, $7,200 for Clara's rent, $5,500 to her divorce attorney. Bank transfers to my parents when they said Dad's pension had run short. Old emails from Mum asking for just a little help with bills. Receipts I didn't remember keeping. Every line a reminder of how many times I'd already stepped in. By the end, the binder Jennifer helped me assemble was thick with paper and history. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in grey slacks and a blouse my grandmother once gave me. Walter and Ruth, my grandparents, came with me. Their quiet presence was the first breath of relief I'd felt in weeks. Grandma squeezed my hand and whispered, "What they're doing isn't right, but you already know that." The courthouse was colder than the summer air outside. Beige walls, thin carpet, plastic chairs that punished patience. On one side of the room, my parents sat with Clara between them. She didn't look at me. Behind them, aunts, uncles, cousins, people who hadn't sent me a birthday card in a decade, now assembled to bear witness to my supposed betrayal. On my side, only Grandma and Grandpa, two steady anchors in a storm designed to make me sink. When the judge entered, the room shifted. He was in his 60s, grey at the temples, glasses perched low on his nose. He scanned the papers as though already tired of the performance to come. My father stood first. "Your Honor, we are not unreasonable people, but we invested our lives, our money, our time into raising Maya. We are only asking for a portion of that back to help our other daughter and her children." The judge peered over his glasses. "Specifically, what did you spend on her education after she turned 18? My parents exchanged glances. Dad cleared his throat. "Well, at that time, Clara had just gotten married. We were helping her and Marcus get established." "So," the judge clarified, "you did not contribute to the defendant's college expenses?" "No," Mom said quickly. "But my mother, Ruth, did. And since she's my mother, I'd argue we supported Maya indirectly." Tahoe. Behind me, Grandma let out the faintest scoff. Jennifer rose with the calm of someone who had already mapped every move. "Your Honor, we have documentation showing that Ms. Salinger has been financially independent since the age of 18. In addition, she has provided repeated financial support to both her parents and her sister." She handed the file to the clerk. "This includes $7,200 in rent payments for her sister, $5,500 to her divorce attorney, and multiple transfers directly to her parents during times they reported hardship." The judge skimmed, then looked up. "So the defendant wasn't receiving support, but giving it?" "Correct," Jennifer said. My mother shifted in her seat. "That money isn't relevant. We're talking about the cost of raising her. Food, shelter, emotional guidance." The judge's tone sharpened. "And why exactly do you need $450,000 now?" Mum hesitated, glanced at Clara, then said softly, "To help Clara pay off the mortgage." A ripple of discomfort moved through the courtroom. Even Uncle Don shifted in his chair. The judge turned to Clara. "Ms. Clara Salinger, do you believe your sister should be responsible for your home loan?" Finally, Clara looked up, her voice steady but defensive. "She's not married. She doesn't have children. I do. Family should help." "And that creates a financial obligation?" the judge asked. "We're family," Clara repeated. The judge raised an eyebrow. "I'm not married either. Should I pay for my clerk's rent or my bailiff's children?" Clara blinked, her mouth closing without an answer. The judge shifted back to my parents. "Did you financially support Maya after she became an adult? Dad's jaw tightened. We were helping Clara. So you prioritized one daughter over another, the judge said evenly. Not an accusation, just a fact. They didn't answer. For the next hour, questions cut like scalpels. Why purchase a house knowing Clara couldn't afford it? Why assume Maya would pay? Why twist help into debt and debt into guilt? My parents stumbled, their answers collapsing under their own contradictions. When the gavel finally struck recess, my chest was still tight, but for the first time in years, I felt seen. Grandma hugged me first. You were steady, she said. That's more than I can say for anyone else in this room. I wasn't sure if I'd won. Not yet. But I knew this. For once, I wasn't the one on trial. The verdict would come in a week. The second time I walked into that courtroom, the air felt different, smaller somehow, like the walls had closed in while the rest of us waited. My palms were slick, even though I kept telling myself I had nothing to fear. Jennifer, calm as ever, carried the binder of evidence like it was a shield forged from facts. My grandparents flanked me. Grandma with her brooch pinned neatly, Grandpa with his jaw set as if bracing against a storm he couldn't stop. When the judge entered, the chatter stilled. He didn't waste words. His voice carried the weight of a gavel before it ever touched the desk. After reviewing the evidence, he said, glasses perched low as always, I find the plaintiff's claim to be without merit. Mr. and Mrs. Salinger, the financial responsibility of raising a child does not entitle you to reimbursement once that child becomes an adult. My mother inhaled sharply. My father stiffened. But the judge wasn't finished. He flipped through the binder Jennifer had given him, pausing as though to let the weight of the pages settle. In fact, the evidence suggests Ms. Maya Salinger has already provided significant financial support to both you and her sister. He set the papers down and looked directly at my parents. Frankly, I find your behavior toward your daughter to be brazen and disappointing. Dismissed. The gavel struck once. Just like that, it was over. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I simply stood there, rooted to the beige carpet, while Jennifer squeezed my shoulder and whispered, You're free. Free. The word echoed in my chest like a bell struck in an empty church. Outside, the summer sun was blinding. Grandma hugged me so tightly I could feel the tremor in her bones. Grandpa kissed the top of my head. Behind us, Clara hurried away, eyes on the pavement, while my parents lingered just long enough to throw me a glance so cold it could have frosted glass. You would think victory would taste sweet. It didn't. It tasted like ash. For weeks afterwards, silence spread across my family tree like rot. No calls, no apologies, just absence. I poured myself into work, into jogging at dawn, into quiet evenings with my cat curled like stone beside me. Slowly, silence became something close to peace. But peace has a way of being tested. It began with a whisper from Grandma during Sunday tea. Your mother came by yesterday, she said carefully. She asked if we'd release her inheritance early. My stomach tightened. For what? To pay Clara's mortgage. I closed my eyes. What did you say? I told her the will is ours to manage, that we'll decide when the time comes. Did she get angry? Grandma sighed. No, she cried. Begged us not to disinherit her. It should have hurt less than the lawsuit, but somehow it cut deeper. Tears, not for me, but for the money. Months passed. Quiet ones. I closed on a modest house. Nothing big, but mine. I painted the kitchen yellow, just like I'd dreamed since I was a teenager. I planted tomatoes in the backyard, adopted a grey cat who followed me from room to room, and learned the rhythm of solitude that wasn't loneliness. Sometimes Grandma and Grandpa came by with pie or newspaper clippings they thought I'd like. Grandpa helped me with the gutters. Grandma reminded me to lock the windows even though I'd already installed a security system. They didn't talk about my parents unless I asked, and I rarely did. I thought maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed, that my parents, left with the house they couldn't afford and the daughter they kept shielding, would find some way to make it work. Clara rented out the house, moved back in with Mom and Dad. They called it temporary, but I knew better. Temporary in our family had a way of calcifying into forever. Then, nearly a year later, an email landed in my inbox. No subject line, just words. We heard you bought a house. Since you now have extra space, we think it would be best if Clara and the boys moved in with you. It would be much more convenient for them there. Let us know when they can move in. Love, Mom and Dad. I read it twice, 3 times. This time, I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I simply typed, I will not be hosting Clara or the boys. If you contact me again with these kinds of demands, I will report the harassment to the police. Do not email me again. Then I hit send, blocked the address, closed the laptop. And for the first time in my life, the silence that followed was not a punishment. It was a gift. These days, my house smells of basil from the windowsill planter and fresh coffee in the mornings. The kitchen walls glow with that soft yellow I painted myself, a colour that feels like sunlight even on grey days. My cat, Marble, curls on the window ledge, tail flicking as he watches birds he'll never chase. There are no raised voices here, no questions sharpened into accusations, just quiet, and I've learned to love it. Grandma and Grandpa come by often. They bring pie or clippings from newspapers they still insist on reading cover to cover. Grandpa helps with little repairs, tightening the gutters, checking the fence posts. Grandma fusses over me, still telling me to lock the windows even though she knows the security system chirps every time the door opens. They don't ask about my parents unless I bring them up, and I rarely do. That silence is a kindness I didn't know I needed. Sometimes, over tea on the porch swing, Grandma slips in a piece of news. Your mother's still talking about you, she murmured once, eyes fixed on the horizon. Still telling people you abandoned Clara. I didn't respond. Your Aunt Margaret told her to stop, Grandma added with a small, almost mischievous smile. Said no one wants to hear it anymore. That made me laugh, quiet, but real. I'm not naive. I know they still think I failed some unspoken test of loyalty, that I should have emptied myself out, handed over everything I'd built just to keep their version of family afloat. Maybe that's how they'll always tell the story at holiday tables I won't be invited to. But here's what I know. I sleep better now. My lungs feel like they can finally fill without that invisible weight pressing down. Clara is still living at home, from what I hear. She rents out the house to cover the mortgage, and my parents help raise the boys while she works. They call it sacrifice. I call it enabling. But it's no longer mine to solve. I haven't seen Evan and Jules in over a year. Sometimes I wonder what they've been told, whether they'll grow up thinking I turned my back on them. Sometimes I wonder if one day they'll knock on my door, taller now, voices deeper, wanting to know the truth. If that day comes, I'll open the door. I'll tell them I loved them enough to refuse being broken in their name. Life has a way of filling spaces you thought would stay hollow. I've started seeing someone. Mark. He has the kind of laugh that makes the room feel bigger, like there's suddenly more air to breathe. He doesn't ask about my family, not yet, and I don't offer. Some ties don't need explaining. Some don't need mending. Every once in a while, I feel the ache of what could have been. If my parents had seen me as more than a fallback plan, if Clara and I had grown side by side instead of stacked in comparison, if love hadn't come with fine print and invoices, but regret is a debt I've stopped paying. Because peace, I've learned, isn't given. It's claimed. Sometimes it's claimed by walking away from the people who insist you owe them everything and choosing instead to build a life where your worth isn't up for debate. And here, in this little house with the yellow kitchen and the tomato plants growing stubbornly out back, I finally know the truth. Blood may bind, but it does not define. Family is not the ones who drain you until you're hollow. Family is the ones who sit quietly beside you, hand on yours, reminding you that you're enough. So when I lock my doors at night, I'm not shutting anyone out. I'm protecting the peace I fought so hard to keep. And for me, that is enough.